Hey everyone, this is Jennifer with Midwest Wilderness Connections, and I am out and about today. And what I want to show you is a new app that I have recently come across. It's new to me. It came out in 2018, but it's an app that you can use to help identify bird calls, bird songs. And so right now I've stopped. I've got an interesting native New World sparrow, and it's singing. And what I'm going to do is just give you an example of how this can be used in the field to identify bird calls. So what you're going to see is on the screen is a sonograph. It is a means by which they graph out bird calls, and so you can visualize them. And you can see it's running, and it's picking up all the different sounds. The kind of the background color is blue. The actual calls and the noises recorded are what are showing up in bright green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold quiet for a second and get a couple of this sparrow's songs in on the sonogram, and then we'll go in and I'll show you how to select that call and analyze it. And so I'm going to like I said, let this go, and as soon as I'm ready to analyze calls, I'm going to hit the pause button, which is the blue circle with the two vertical lines next to each other. Okay, so the bird called, and what you're going to see is you see the call starting with the bright green. It's about the 3 kilohertz. If you look at the scale to the left, that 3 kilohertz line, if you go to the right, and you can see the actual call is up in that area, and you're looking for the brightest green areas. And what you do to select the call you want to analyze, you use your finger and you touch where the call starts and about where the call finishes, like I did just there. This takes a little bit of practice. Sometimes if you make it too big, it won't be able to identify the call. So it may take a couple attempts of adjusting those lines, but this app is actually really pretty good. I've tried some other apps for this type of thing and wasn't as impressed as I am with this BirdNET app. So I clicked to the left of the call. I drug my finger to the right to the end of the call, and you can see now I have a selection, a snippet of that sonogram that I want the app to analyze. So then I'm going to go down to this button down below is Analyze. And before I do that, it's saying that the interval that you've selected is at the 10.61 second mark through the 13.33 second mark of the sonogram. The duration is 2.72 seconds. It tells you the projected file size. I'll tell you why that kind of stuff is important in just a second. But first, let's go ahead and analyze that call. All right, so I hit the analyze, and it came up with a Vesper sparrow, which is correct. We had a Vesper sparrow that was calling, and what the app does, it has different levels of certainty, where it tells you, or the likeliness that they made a correct identification. So in this particular instance, it's telling me it's a Vesper sparrow, provides the Latin name, and says that it's almost certain that it correctly identified that call. So what you can do then is you can click on Vesper sparrow. It'll take you over to a Wikipedia page. I'll show you that in a little bit when I go through some of the other options that are out there, or the recordings that you have saved, and how you can get to those same types of pages. But what I'm going to do is, since I know that it was a Vesper sparrow calling and that is the correct call, I'm going to hit Submit Feedback. Was it the correct species? You put in yes, no, not sure. In this case, yes. And hit Submit. So, feedback submitted. Thank you. So, what this app is it's a database of calls. And the more people that use the app and submit calls with positive IDs, the better and better this app is going to get. So there's a library of calls that's being developed. So there is a licensing agreement when you agree to use the app, and when you hit submit or analyze, that basically you're agreeing to your video, or not video, your sound snippet to go into this library, for it to be used to just make this app even more accurate over time. The other thing that is important is that some species, like I'm thinking cardinals, orioles, they can have a range of different calls, or the frequency of their calls, or the way their calls are somewhat structured is different depending on what part of their range you're in. And so the more snippets of calls from different regions they have in this library, again, the better the app becomes. And then also scientists will use these calls to determine whether or not there's a difference in the frequencies of the calls, or things of that sort, and potentially link that to some other environmental variable out there in the world. Because I know that's a big thing right now with the juncos. The juncos, they've got populations that are diverging in their calls, and they're using these call libraries, these sound libraries, to determine those differences, where they're occurring, where they're not. So what I'll do is we'll go to the menu now, and here at the menu you can say show your observations, and there's a list of observations here that you can see. Number 7 was the one we just recorded, which is Vesper Sparrow, and it gives you, again, it documents the almost certain, and the date, time, and where the call was recorded. If you click on that record, it will open up the map and show where you recorded that call, the date, time, location again, and the species ranked by probability was the Vesper Sparrow. And sometimes when you do this, when you hit analyze call, it may have, like, say we had Vesper Sparrow here, and it was almost certain. And it could have had, I'm just going to say song sparrow below it, and it would have said uncertain. So you can get a couple of options, but usually it's pretty good at picking out the one. So in this case, it was Vesper Sparrow. And earlier I told you if you clicked on Vesper Sparrow after you analyzed the call, you could get to the Wikipedia page. That's what we're doing here. Same thing. So it goes right to the Vesper Sparrow Wikipedia page, where you can go through and learn more about species there. You can also link to the macular library, and then you can view the different sound and imagery for a Vesper Sparrow. You can also link to the Ebird account, and at some point in time here, I'll start doing little snippets on really neat things you can do with Ebird. It's a fabulous app. But the Ebird, you can go in, that's where you can listen to calls. This is where when you're out and about and identifying birds, you can keep track of and submit your species lists, which we will mention because that's also important for this particular app. Another thing that I tested out with the BirdNET app is whether or not it was able to identify a drumming woodpecker. So I just happened to be in the woods, heard a drumming woodpecker, tried it out. And so what we'll do here is I'll just let this run through and give you a demonstration. You can see that the woodpecker on the sonogram, the woodpecker's call, or the drumming, is going to be really low, almost down around that 1 kilohertz reading level, and it's just going to look like a brighter green horizontal line that just goes for a little bit and then breaks. And so I'll just run it through, show you guys an example of how to ID woodpecker drumming. So what you saw there is I started honing in on the drumming where it occurred. Don't pay attention to those vertical lines that go, they start brighter green at the bottom and streak up to the top. That's not the call. The call is that horizontal line, like I said, around that 1 kilohertz level. So you can see there's actually a series of horizontal lines. The one that is the brightest, that lowest one that's the brightest, is the actual call. All the lines above that are what are called harmonics. We just ignore those, and for this app you don't really need to worry about that. That's just more for informational purposes. But we're looking at that horizontal bar that's down around that 1 kilohertz mark, that's within the area that I've selected. And then I hit the Analyze button, and you can see that we are submitting the call for analysis. And as you can see, the prediction that the tool came up with was hairy woodpecker at almost certain. And it was indeed a hairy woodpecker. So you can use this even if you are interested in identifying drumming woodpeckers. Now we are back at this main screen, and we're going to go check out the Explore Your Area. So what you can see is, based on your current location, the app has gone through and it's using the Ebird that I told you about earlier, where you could submit your sightings of birds. This app has gone into Ebird, figured out all of the birds that have been documented in this local area in the past week. And it's showing me a list of those birds here. And so what you can do is, if you want to learn new birds, or you want to find a specific bird, or you just want to know what's being documented in your area, then you can hop on here. And then again, I'm just going to use this American coot. We're going to click on it, the arrow to the right, and again, it brings you the Wikipedia, the Maculae Library, and Ebird are your options at the bottom of the screen. You can go to whichever page has what you're looking for. So we're going to go backwards again. And then you can get into the settings, and this is where you just pick just the everyday options, the common names. Do you want them in English, Spanish, etc.? So you pick the language. When I told you, when you go to the Explore Your Area, and I told you that it's looking for records that have been documented in the past week, this is where you can change that. So you can change it. So it's weekly, or you can say, well, I want you to analyze calls of any birds that were within my area year-round. And the only issue with that is, if you do year-round and say you're in the middle of winter or you're in the middle of summer, it's going to be analyzing calls from all the species instead of whittling down to a smaller subset. So by going year-round, potentially, you could set yourself up for some false identifications. I don't know. It's just one of those things that you got to know. You got to kind of consider, what is it I'm doing, and whether or not you think you're going to be able to weed out. You may get multiple species in that list when you submit to analyze the calls. And it may be easier for you to just leave it on weekly, so it whittles those calls down for you. It just depends on your user level and how familiar you are with bird calls. When you get down here into things like detection sensitivity and spectrogram length, spectrogram grain, amplitude gain, maximum frequencies, these are getting, like, this is where you can pop the hood. If you're more advanced in your birding, or if you want to get more advanced in the app, you can go in and change these defaults. And I'll explain to you why that may be something you want to do. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to need it. For example, the spectrogram length. If you guys noticed, that lark's, or the Vesper sparrow, called a couple of times during my sonogram. What I like to do anytime I'm working with these sonograms or sonographs is that I want to get a couple of the calls on it. So if I analyze one call and the app has trouble with it, I have a second call. I have a second option that I can go in and see if maybe the app picked up on that call better than the first one. But the Vesper Sparrow has a long pause between calls. So I wasn't able to get both calls on my one screen. If I know I'm dealing with a species like that, where there are going to be long pauses between the calls, that's when I can change my spectrogram length. So I could have set this up to like maybe 25 seconds, and I would have been able to get a couple of those calls on one spectrogram. And so that's one time where, that may be something you want to do, depending on the species that's calling. So just so you know, that's an option. You can do that. Maximum frequency. This can be helpful too, especially when you're in a location where you may have a lot of other noises going around in the background. Each bird has a different frequency call. So earlier I told you that the Vesper Sparrow is at the 3 kilohertz range on that spectrograph. If you remember, the range went from 0 to 12 kilohertz on the left-hand side of the sonograph. If our bird is calling at 3, if you reduce this down to 3, we may be cutting off the call. But if you reduce it to 6, what's going to happen is the app is just going to disregard anything with a frequency over 6 kilohertz. And so it's a way for you to deal with weeding out sounds that that may interfere with the call and identification of the call. So that for you is going to take some practice. And if you've got a certain bird, like you don't even have to know the bird species and know that it sings at blank kilohertz. You just have to look at the sonograph, see where the call is showing up, and say, oh, that's between 4 and 6 kilohertz. And you can drop it to the 6 kilohertz. And so that can be helpful. So I wanted to cover that here. And then amplitude gain, where you could change this is if you have a bird. Let me see if I click on amplitude here. If you get a bird that's very quiet and the call is very quiet, you can change the amplitude gain to try to pick up that call. That can happen quite a bit. So I could see people, even novice beginners, wanting to go in and fiddle around a little bit with amplitude gain. And so you guys are just going to have to kind of play with this and figure out how it works. It's just going to take some practice. But like I said, I think once you guys get into here and use it, you're going to really like this app. The spectrogram contrast, you can change the contrast of that blue versus green. This is all preference, what you want to see, how you want it to look. Same thing when we come up here, you can change the color map of the spectrogram. And so you can change the colors. This may be helpful. Maybe some colors are easier to use for maybe somebody who's colorblind, etc. This is where you can change it. So this is all user preference. The audio import source, like me, and what I'm doing right now, I am just using the default, which is just the default microphone on my particular phone, which is a Samsung Android. But you could also use a mic. It gives you the option for voice recognition, etc. And detection sensitivity, again, that is going to allow you to maybe hone in on fainter calls. And so there are various levels there that you would just have to kind of fiddle around with and then become familiar with as you use the app. So that kind of concludes my quick run through of the BirdNET app. Right now, it's an Android app. I do not know yet if this is an app that is available to other systems, such as iPhones, or some of the other types of smartphones. So that's something that if you use those types of phones, then you may have to do a little research. But I do know this is available for Androids. Go ahead, start using the app. Let me know if you like it. Submit comments later. Share this video. Try to get as many people using it as possible, because like I said, the more records that get submitted through this app with positive identifications, the better and better it's going to get. The more and more it's going to help regarding research and science of these species and their calls. So thanks again. This is Jennifer from Midwest Wilderness Connections. Have a good time out there birding, everybody.